Okay. We call this December 1st, 2022 meeting of the AMAT Technical Advisory Committee to order. It is 2:32 p.m. Aaron, will you please do the roll call for it?
Of course, Brian Lindemood,
Present.
Yemi Alini,
Present.
Luke Boland,
Present.
Matt Stitchick, Steve Rebuffo,
Present.
Todd Van Hoe,
Here.
Brad Coy, here, Kent Colhays,
Here.
Jamie Acton,
Here.
and Craig Lyon.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Perfect. Thank you, Aaron. And do the public involvement announcement.
Of course, AMAT's committee meetings are open to the public, and the public is provided an opportunity to comment at each meeting. Business items are first presented by staff or consultant, then the committee is given a chance to ask questions. Once that is done, the public is invited to formally comment. Each participant will have 3 minutes to speak on their topic. A couple of housekeeping items. If you're joining us virtually and you're not a member of the committee, please turn your camera off when you're not speaking on an item. And if you're joining us by phone, to mute and unmute the microphone, press *6. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. We'll now move into the approval of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. Lyons, seconded by Mr. Van Hoe. Do we have any changes? Okay, are there any objections to approving the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. We also have some meeting minutes before us from the November 3rd meeting, our last month's meeting. We have a motion for the approving the minutes.
Second.
Okay, I heard Mr. Van Hoe, or Mr. Colhays move in and Mr. Lyons second. We'll go with that this time. Are there any changes to the minutes? Any objections to approving the minutes? See?
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Oh,
Yeah, that's.
okay, that's right. So hearing objections, the November 3rd, 2022 meeting minutes are approved. And let the record show that Matt Stitchick has joined us at 2:34 p.m. Moving on to agenda item 5A, which is the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan Fiscal Analysis. This going to be Chelsea?
Yes, this will be Chelsea, the project manager. I will back with everyone else. No, thank you.
Good, take it away, Chelsea.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. You have had the materials around the financial analysis for about a month, I believe. And some of you have reached out about questions, and I really appreciate that. Basically, this is what we go through every time we do an MTP project or MTP plan. We have to make sure that we're fiscally constrained as per federal regulation. This time, we weren't able to get a work session together, just given the holidays and scheduling and other work sessions that were happening. So I'm happy to have a robust discussion today, but that's also part of why we wanted to get the materials out super early and give you all plenty of time to review them. What we did in advance, given sort of the financial dynamics in the country right now, we wanted to present two different scenarios of the financial plan going forward. So we presented a high scenario and a low scenario. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through all the different, well, not every single one of the different line items here, but most of them, the big bucket items, and then which ones show sort of disparity between the high and the low and why we sort of thought about that. And what we're looking for today is we're trying to get your feedback on whether the high or the low scenarios are more reasonable, or if there's some combination of that that makes more sense. We're trying to understand if you think any other changes should be made to what's presented here in these two spreadsheets. And then also, we wanted to bring up the idea of changing the percent allocation of AMAT's funding to non-motorized projects to be more than 15%. Right now, I believe the bracket is 10 to 15%. And in the spreadsheets, we show 15%, but knowing that that's sort of a big priority that we've heard from the community, we wanted to put it out there for this committee to discuss whether or not we should raise that even more. And I believe that's in, this committee would have to vote for that, and the policy committee would have to vote for that to change that number to increase it higher than 15%, which is the current ceiling. And so looking at these two spreadsheets, they're color coded. And so you'll see the the green lines are municipal funds. So we've got the capital improvement program, we've got local funds for transit, and we've got general obligation bonds for transit as well. Under state funding, which is the blue or sort of purpley lines, we've got legislative grants for roads and for non-motorized projects. We've got the general obligation bonds for roads. And then we've also got the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority funding for transit. And under those state funding streams, those are some of where we put the high and the low scenarios. So legislative grants, state general obligation bonds are some of what we sort of were like, well, those aren't always coming through. They may or may not, depending on how well the state is doing. And so that was one area that we sort of discussed. In the low scenario, you can see that under the roads, we put no funding under state legislative grants for motorized or non-motorized. Under the GEO bond, we put no funding. We left the mental health trust funding alone because that's a sort of separate. So that's one area where these two scenarios differ. Going on to federal. So federal is all the red. Obviously, we get quite a bit of funding from federal. I'm going to focus on the two areas in the federal where we have differences between our two scenarios. The federal other, it reflects possible grants. This might include the Reconnecting Communities that the Assembly just voted to support a project on earlier in November. There's a ton of other grant programs that have come through with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so that's one area where we thought, well, maybe we could be really aggressive and get a ton of federal funding now that there's a large number of grant programs available. There's not just sort of the typical Tiger or, infra programs. There are a ton more to look at and to look into. And so you'll see in the high scenario, we're looking at $140 million between now and 2050 versus the low scenario. We thought even in the low scenario, there are so many programs that we probably still have a decent chance of getting some smaller programs, maybe some planning grants, maybe some other, funding would come through. So we still have something even in the low scenario under the federal grants. And then the FHWA highway system, that is the second line under roads. You'll see that one is also different. Sorry, the second federal under roads. So it's the fifth line down under the roads. You'll see that total is different between the two. One is over $1 billion and one is a little over 750 million. And the difference there is just that expecting that allocation may drop for one reason or another. We got this big boost with Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Maybe when that expires here in another couple of years, maybe that would drop off for whatever reason. Again, just trying to show two different scenarios to try to spark some conversation, get some feedback for how we should be moving forward with this. And then there's a little bit more background into, we're adding inflation. So we're thinking about for our revenue, we're looking at an inflation rate of 2.5%. And that's calculated as it has been for previous MTPs using both the U.S. Department of Labor and the state of Alaska Consumer Price Index background. And then also for the costs, we're adding inflation as well. Looking at 4.5, knowing that inflation has gone up quite a bit recently, looking at a higher inflation rate of 4.5 for costs in the near term through 2034, and then decreasing it slightly to 3.5% for longer term projects. So 2035 to 2050 projects, that inflation rate goes down slightly. We go into a little more detail around methodology, but I'm going to pause there and just space for questions and discussion.
Hey, thanks, Jesse. Any questions? Jesse?
Question on the geo bond. So the numbers you have in there, looks like in 2028, 57.8. And then out in 36, 70 million. How did you come up with those numbers? I don't remember, but we haven't had it in a while, but we get some previously, but curious.
Yeah, you're looking at the high scenario.
Yeah, we have this in there.
Yep, so you'll see every scenario, or excuse me, every line item has a note related to it, and you can flip to the other side, or the second page and see sort of our background into that. So note 7, the numbers we put in there are sort of relatively related to average of geo bonds in 2002, 2008, 2012, and then just sort of, you know, giving a somewhat random, but also based in historical patterns, infusion in those years.
Yeah, I mean, I get the concept of having it X amount of years. I'm just curious how we're just taking it from the previous ones and saying it's going to be going up by a factor of whatever.
Inflation.
And then the non-motorized state legislative grants. I know there was funding in for the Alaska Long Trail and some other things, but historically, those have not existed. And so the numbers in the high one seem a little hopeful, which is, I guess, kind of what we're doing, I guess. I don't know if there will be none. I'm kind of the low scenario for both the geo bonds and the state legislative grants that are motorized. That 0 seem probably unrealistic, but the numbers in the high seem just that, a little high to me. So I was just seems a little hopeful.
Yeah, that was why we put 2 scenarios forward.
Yeah. Didn't we last time have low, middle, and high? Did we have medium?
We had a meeting. So
So
this time when we were talking through, just, we couldn't come up with enough numbers to justify doing the meeting.
okay.
Are these like costs, do they cover programs as well as projects? Like, I know the legislative, there were some grants that the traffic department is receiving this next year that are like a traffic calming project, you know. Which isn't, yeah, I'm not sure if that sort of thing is accounted for in here. You know, there's some pedestrian walkway and things.
My understanding is that that would be included.
Any federally funded project would need to be in.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, real quickly on your FHWA, NHS, Anchorage, Eagle River, is this the money that is typically funded through AMAX, or where do those dollar figures come from? Lines 3, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, under federal other, FHWA, NHS, and non-NHS, Anchorage, Chugack, Eagle River.
Yeah, so the FHWA NHS is reflects the STIP. And the following line, the non-NHS reflects the TIP.
I think that even in the high scenario, I mean, 25, you're saying 25 million a year. In previous history, that's probably a little bit low, but I think in future years, there's literally nothing in the SNP. I know you're trying to figure out numbers, and that's a concern for us at DOT that we've had up, but I think that's something that we've talked to AMAS as well about, is there are no DOT projects in the municipality of Anchorage in the current STIP or any proposed, minus, I'm speaking specifically for the Anchorage whole, certainly the entire, is this the consideration of the entire municipality, or is it AMAS area?
The events area.
Okay. So yeah, there's not a lot in the STIP. So.
It's that hopeful part.
Yeah, and I think that's why in the low scenario, we dropped it, but maybe we need to drop it more. You know.
Thank you.
So if over the next few years it's low, but then there's more that gets put in, how likely would it be that some of these numbers could still concerns about?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, we right now still haven't even developed a process for adding types of projects that would be needed, criteria that would be needed to fund projects in the Anchorage area, other than one ARC, which is pretty small dollar stuff. So, so hopefully we're working on that now, but, yeah, modernization and, expansion projects are nowhere in their short-term horizon.
We have added some recent projects. 36. There are some projects being added to this. Declining trend is concerned.
Okay. So as we're having these questions, I guess, we're not quite at the stage of like making amendments, but are these things that we would then like request? Are we gonna plan to request some amendments on this, or is this be considered for the policy? Like, how does that work?
So my understanding is this isn't the last time this is gonna come in front of you. This is sort of helping us frame our revenue and understand the inflation, getting approval on sort of these inflation rates around the cost in order for us to better condense our project list, which is right now is very extensive based on the nomination period.
Okay, so giving some feedback now is probably that.
Yep, yeah, so we're just trying to understand whether you think these are more or less reasonable, whether you think, feedback about the STIP and the non-motorized legislative grants, how do we need to tweak this for everyone here to feel more comfortable with it going forward? And then obviously you'll see it as the MTP process keeps moving forward, but we need to be able to better understand what our constraints are going to be as we refine our project list.
So, but it would be getting it approved now for use to develop the list. So this is really, the intent is to get this done now.
So if there are some changes we would like, and we could
Do it now.
recommend them.
Yes.
Thanks, Sarah. Do we have other comments or questions from the committee? Okay, looking like committee's gone through. Do we have any questions or comments from the public? I see a gentleman here in the back. If you'll state your name.
Yeah, my name is Michael Fetzer, I'm CAC rep for District 6. On the high scenario, the year 2045, I don't know if you covered that, I just couldn't hear it. What's happening in 2045 with the expected revenues are increasing so dramatically? And the road revenues and the pedestrian areas. What?
Yeah, thanks, James. I believe that's just a issue with the formula in the spreadsheet.
So that 143 million for the road revenue source total and also the 530 for pedestrian trails.
We're not getting $137 million in carbon reduction funding.
Well, I'm wondering why it happened so suddenly that when you.
It was, I think it's an error.
Yes, good catch.
We're not going to be getting $530 million in 2025. I mean, I guess you want to be hopeful, so that we can cross our fingers.
I'm not seeing this only on the type of project, I don't know.
It's,
Yeah, it's not the same.
It's the highest.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Yeah, good catch. So you'll relook at those equations in the spreadsheet, which looks like it'll probably drop at about 500,000.
I'm not sure what the issue is because it doesn't look like it's carried through to the total. So I think there's some sort of funny glitch right there in the high scenario. And
Yeah, the total is identical to that one. There's numbers all the same. Yes. We didn't
or
care.
maybe even when it was
Just
PDF,
for that
somehow it got correct.
Just for that in a second.
Oh, I see. Okay,
So I helped you math.
at the bottom, it looks like
Yeah.
it does carry through to the total of the very bottom row,
Yeah,
but it seems like maybe what happened is the total for the year, or for all 25 years or 28 years,
Maybe.
got transposed to 2045 or something.
Okay.
Yeah, look at because they're the same. It's the same as the final total.
Yeah. Okay. So you got some leads to potentially what might happen. One other thought that I have on looking at this is if you add row numbers for ease when you go to policy committee, be able to just have a number that's just kind of a identifier that. Okay, any other questions from the public? Anybody online that you see listening? Oh, I see, looks like hand is raised. So Emily, go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks. This is Emily Weiser with Bike Anchorage. And it probably won't surprise you that I'm going to put in a plug for a little bit more non-motorized funding. I can't speak to the feasibility of getting that funding, but you know, we do see in several of the municipalities' policy documents that it's a goal to increase non-motorized mode shares for transportation. And I also feel like we've got some catching up to do in terms of that hasn't been a priority in the past. And so we kind of need to make up for that and put in a little bit of extra effort and funding and infrastructure for it now. So yeah, thanks for your consideration of that.
Okay, thanks, Emily. And so kind of along that line, you mentioned something similar, that this is using 15%. And so if that was something that we wanted to consider, I mean, is this 15, assuming that it's an average, like year to year,
It's 15% of the annual allocation.
kind of what's assumed?
Now, the AMAT's policies and procedures talk about that specifically, the breakdown of how much money goes in each funding category. So that would be something that would have to be changed in there as well. So needed this part of it, but you would want to change that later as well. That's for the tip, but it's kind of an overall sense of what we're doing.
yeah, the tip is 10 to 15% over 4 years of the tip. This is just a straight 15% per year. Recognizing maybe some will be higher, so it's our way of averaging.
So this already kind of assumes that your range can't be 10 to 15 because it'd be more like 12.5 to 17.5. If you kind of shift your 5% range, is that am I reading that right?
Well, I guess,
In the NTP, not for the tip.
Okay. And when you said potentially raise it from 15, did you have another percentage in mind that you were thinking?
I
That said 20,
20? Kind of a
25, 30.
yeah, I mean, multiple.
really made up for the group to discuss.
Is now a good time to discuss that?
Absolutely.
Should we make a motion first, or should we discuss that first with what you suggest as far as policy or approach procedures?
I think you could do it either way. I think you could include it as part of the, motion around approving this, given that this is showing 15% of the allocation. So I think it could be an update to this if that change is suggested, or you can approve this and then a separate motion around the non-motorized.
They need to do a motion, main motion for the item itself, and then you can have discussion. And you can have amendments as part of that discussion.
Okay, sounds good. We'll do that then. Do we have any motion from the committee?
Next thing.
Just a motion to approve the 2050 MVP financial planning assumptions and methodology.
I think
We would recommend to the policy committee that approval of it.
Yeah.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Lefko and seconded by Mr. Lindenmuth to recommend to the policy committee, recommend approval to the policy committee.
With the math correction that was identified.
Are we recommending the higher or the low?
I think we recommend both.
That feedback says, does the high or low revenue scenario seem more reasonable or some of each? So well, let's just pick one and we can start the discussion anyway.
So you want to make a friendly amendment to my motion that I can agree with?
Let's make a friendly amendment to say low scenario. We can discuss it.
No objection from
Just throw it out.
I was going to suggest take what was average, that we divide by two. But keep the middle.
Okay.
But
You'll be fine from the motion.
I think law is conservative.
Sounds good. So the motion is to recommend the low scenario to the policy committee for approval. Let's have some discussion. What are some of the, I guess, what's the thoughts from the committee on?
I've got a question,
Okay, go ahead.
relating to tinkering with the 15%. We've got 5-year MTP or something like that was based on the 15%. If we suddenly change that number up, down, some direction like that, we then have to go and refigure all that because that was all fiscally constrained.
So the 5-year tip that we just.
Yeah. So how does that change that? And we just, if it gets changed by policy committee, do we then have to go and redo all of that again?
Thoughts from the,
Well, we would have to get the policies and procedures changed because the policies and procedures are 10 to 15%.
Okay.
Remember, it's just an average over the 4 years. So no, we wouldn't have to go back and redo everything in the tip. We would just have to, because right now, I believe it is over 10 to 15% in the current tip for non-motorized, including the pavement. But we would have to work on it. And it's something to keep in mind as we move forward. So what it would do is basically, in my mind, is if any future funding became available and that percentage was changed and we're not meeting that percentage, I would recommend we put projects in to help address that, not go back and redo everything.
But if I understood what you just said correctly, we're currently over 50.
With the pavement included, I believe we are. I think well, I don't know with Amendment 1. I forget where we're at with Amendment 1. Because that did some pretty substantial increases to cost estimates for. So I have to look and see what.
So really, all this does is just influence future decisions. It doesn't bind. If we change the number or the number.
Because the policies, I mean, it's AMAS's policy and the policy committee can decide whether they want to adhere to it or not. They could say, we don't want any funding for non-motorized. So we're going to take all the projects out, or we want 60%. It's still up to them. It's just the policies really give staff a range of what to look for when making recommendations on changes to the tip or when we're developing the tip itself.
Well, I guess to that extent, if it's basically policy, slightly more than suggested and stuff like that, we're not in line with it now. We would have to make a fairly substantial change, like 25% or 5% or, like that, or to really have any sort of, I think, meaningful effect, is that correct?
So right now, if amendment number 1, we are at 19.1% without the pavement. With the pavement, we are over 26%.
So do we need to change the number at all?
I guess the idea is, what do you feel comfortable with as a committee moving forward? Do you want us to focus more on non-motorized? Because what it really is going to come down to is how many projects are put into the MTP that help us get to that percentage. So do you want us to be putting more non-motorized specific projects into the MTP? If so, then change the percentage point up, change it up to whatever percentage you guys are comfortable.
So it sounds like the current tip has
The amendment.
the amendment. Tip amendment 1 is currently in the process of going through the approval process as either 19 to 26, depending on what you're looking.
Because this is the capital side, not the operating, let's say 19.1% is what we're at.
So if we envision a tip, future tips to be like that, then it would make sense to say, oh, based on what we're doing, our approach, our policy should probably increase to kind of match them. This is what we're doing, this is the direction you're going. It doesn't, so it's not necessarily that we're out of, I mean, I guess we're over that but the policy committee can still vote over it. So it's, or we can make decisions that it's more like when the staff goes, you're shooting for that. So if we raise it, then staff can more match the MTP to what the tip is looking like and what the community is asking for versus maybe lots of amendments later where you put a 15% and then the community comes and says, we want more non-motorized. And so it becomes maybe an iterative loop a little bit more versus if we just raise it, then you can, from the very beginning, kind of put more bite in the head. That's kind of fair.
I mean, yeah, we're still gonna have to update the policies and procedures for the tip, but for the MTP at least, if you raise it now, it gives us a better idea of what to go for when we start looking at projects to include. And remember, this is just 15, whatever percentage of the AMAT's allocation, not anyone else's allocation.
So Aaron, this doesn't become a math problem until you look at what's in the tip and see how much is non-motorized and how much is not. Since we're at 19% now, that happened in spite of the fact that it's set at 15. Right?
Correct.
Yeah.
That was kind of my point, was if it's purely an advisory number,
What's wrong with it?
well, I think we're gonna have, I mean, it feels to me like if we're almost 5% over now without, from an advisory standpoint, unless we were to do something, I think, a little bit more substantial, like say 30% or 1% or something like that. I'm not entirely convinced how much changing it to 20% or 12 or some other number close to 15, how much of an impact it's actually gonna have other than just get a bunch of people upset.
I'm kind of inclined to agree.
It would have to be substantial to make a difference.
And we seem to be behaving in favor in spite of what the numbers.
That's kind of why we wanted to bring it up, is because we were looking at this and we're like, well, we're trending upward anyway, so let's get the discussion going and talk about this and see where the committees are at, and see if, because the 10 to 15% was set years ago. And so, and it just hasn't been updated yet. And one of the actions in the 2040 MTP is to look at those policies and procedures for the funding percentage and adjust them based on what we've been hearing from the public. And so this is kind of our attempt to start that discussion, start it with the MTP and then carry it through to the policies and procedures.
Well, okay, so help me understand hearing from the public. I mean, has there been some sort of action taken specifically looking at this sort of thing, whether it was even a doodle poll or something like that, said, do you want to see more non-motorized versus motorized or more transit versus this? Or is this really more, you know, the noise we hear in the room, for lack of a better term? We don't have anything formal that says that there's a call to action for non-motorized versus motorized.
I believe is a lot of the comments we've heard, you know, the 800+ comments that we got on this, plus all the various other comments we've gotten over the years. There has been a call for action for us to start funding non-motorized projects, transit projects more than we have in the past. What percentage? They haven't said you need, I mean, some people have been extreme, be like 90% of your funding needs to go in. But that's why we don't really have a percentage to bring forward to you guys, because we didn't have anything that was like, it needs to be 45% to make this kind of change to the transportation system.
And I will just add, looking at project nominations for the MTP, there were almost twice as many non-motorized nominations as there were.
Sure. So if we took this table as you presented it, with the 15%, would you as staff then go and kind of shoot for only having of all the twice as many non-motorized? You would probably pare this back significantly, to try to hit a 15%.
Yeah, they would have to fit within the total non-motorized.
Whereas if we right now said, you know, our tip is 20% almost, and we envision that that's probably what it will be to go into the future. So let's shoot for 20%, or, you know, whatever we might change it to, then you would shoot for that as you go through and kind of parse through all the projects that have been presented and come up with a little bit different package. So it sounds to me that if we don't make a change, what might happen is that all the public that submitted projects are going to, like, they're gonna like raise their voice, and we'll probably have to do it eventually, which is probably what we would want to do if we kind of follow what we already done with the tip. So it seems like it makes sense to me anyway that we can raise that so that it allows you a little bit more discretion to put more of those projects in as you're looking through and kind of putting your first staff effort into the project.
This next question was more philosophical. Would we leave it as a range and kind of like it is now, or would we peg it to a specific number?
I think the flexibility of a range is a better idea. We had numbers in there previously where it was 15% of the allocation. It's like, if we're at 14, are we breaking the rule, or are we for 16, are we breaking the rule? So the range, I think, has helped in the past for the policy and procedures. That was just for the tip, not the MTP.
Right, and that's for the policies and procedures.
Yeah.
The
We would need
MTP
a hard.
one.
So is this, the 15% that's in there, that is, where did you?
It's the max of our current policy and procedures.
It's 10 to 15.
Okay, so that's.
10 to 15, so we chose, it used to be 10 in the 2040, and we said 15 this go around.
Okay.
And then we were like, maybe we need to do more, but we didn't want to make the decision without involving them.
So
Let's get this down.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Great.
State your name and-
James Starzyk, AMS liaison for DOT. I worked pretty intimately with the development of the 23-26 tip with Aaron. And like you've heard from AMS staff here, there has certainly been a focus on non-motorized development in Anchorage from the community. And I had heard this as well from the DOT side. So I would really, I would definitely support their assumptions that there is a definite call to action for improved non-motorized. And while we were putting the tip together, I felt somewhat constrained because of this 10-15% rule on how we could effectively respond to what was very clearly being told to us by the community. And so I really feel, from my technical standpoint, I feel that this is a great way to both signal to the community that we are hearing what they're saying, and B, to give staff the ability to program that tip instead of going, man, we really need to try to get this to 15%, to give us that feeling of confidence that we would be following the policy committee's wishes, which would be a higher percentage.
Question for staff, and then does staff have a feeling about what sort of numbers that are being driven to organically.
We didn't suggest a number. We didn't
Feeling
discuss.
constrained, what would undo your bounds and allow you to do all the things that you feel compelled to do?
I don't think we can answer that.
So maybe another question, the 19%, you felt constrained still even at just 19?
Well, I think, and then, I mean, I'm saying this from a personal perspective. I felt that it was appropriate, in both, the quality of the projects and how they scored, and also balanced with what I've heard from the community. I really supported, Aaron's decision to program the tip as it were to the 19%. Yeah. What, I mean, I don't think it would be very difficult, to put a magic number on it, like, Craig alluded to, you know, it's having a range gives some flexibility. But I think that the number is greater than 15%. And, again, I think both as a guardrails for staff and development of the tip and as a reflection to the community of AMAT's values reflecting what they have been telling us. I think something, a higher range would be appropriate.
Go ahead, Craig.
So while I disagree with this statement that non-motorized has not been a priority here, I would be fine with either saying 15 to 20%, or if we want a hard number, say 20%, I'm okay with raising it. I think we've done a lot for non-motorized. I think there's an argument. You're not going to convince me that we haven't made a priority. All of the things that we've done and having a bike and ped committee and having a non-motorized plan, none of which are required by federal law. It's been a priority. Showing it 19% suggests that it's been a priority. But I'm happy to say either a range of 15 to 20 for flexibility, or if you just want a hard number, go with 20. Either one's fine with me.
Two things. Number one, I do agree with, there should be a range, not a hard number. Secondly, though, you know, this is an event, this is a motion to approve which one of these sheets of paper we like better. Should the actual adjustment to the target non-motorized be a separate action, or does it need to be part of this action?
Changing it on these sheets of paper can be part of this action. Changing it to the policies and procedures is gonna have to be something else that we bring in a later date.
But that's also the policy and procedures just relate to the tip.
Yes.
So we can do this right now.
I think what probably makes sense is we should have an idea of what we want that policy procedures to be. So that when we change this, it's falling in that range. It makes sense. So kind of the thought that I have been having is, you know, if, as you said, Aaron, with the pavement, it's 26, without pavement, it's 19. You know, that 19 feels about right. If the range was more of a 15 to 25%, a little bit larger range, and we proposed on this, say 20, then that's, with that kind of vision, then, you know, if you're shooting for 20, you could be a little bit high, a little bit low, versus kind of feeling like you're pushing up against a threshold.
Looks like we're pushing up against it. We switch it though. We're at 19 now, no pavement, 26 with pavement. We're already, by adjusting it, already back up against that threshold without any. From my perspective, if we're already there now, where we're gonna be in 5 years, are we gonna be back up against it again? And have to adjust it again, or do we just make it 15 to 30%, allowing some room on the upper end? Because it's all about how you dice and slice it, right? Pavement is 7% of what that number is, one way or the other. I think we'd give them more space if we did 15 to 30.
So thoughts, I guess, from the committee on that range is, are you guys feeling comfortable with this general range? And then we'll talk and make a specific percentage on this table, but just curious stuff.
As far as range goes, I think that, regardless of what the range is, I like the idea of having a larger range, you know, we're saying 5 to 10, 15 to 20, why pin ourselves down to such a limitation?
Yeah.
A larger range would be better off, and allow more flexibility.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Are you saying a larger range, 15 to 20?
Yeah.
Well, whatever the range is, more than 5%
More than
difference.
5%,
So maybe 15 to 25?
Yeah, whatever.
or 15 to 30, because some years you'll hit, some years you'll be at the high end and some years you'll be at the low end.
That's why
But now you're
How many
talking,
trails you got on the report?
1 in 3 projects is a non-motorized project.
Well, I mean, the point being, like I said, you're at 19 to 26, depending on how you slice and dice it. So you might as well just push it to 30. And then depending on what direction you're looking at it from.
And that's why I asked, is this a math problem or is this a planning window?
So,
You know,
Both,
you know,
both kind of in a way, so.
is it coming down on stone tablets? That's gotta be 30% every year?
Yeah.
Or you screw, or you fail?
It's flexible, because some years might be 30%, 35%, and others might be 10. Just because of how obligations work with projects. So that's why we tend to, for the tip, average it over the 4 years in that range.
that makes sense. Okay, go ahead.
Well, for the sake of any discussion on this, I'm going to make it 15, 30.
So I think at this point, we're not able to make, because we're not adjusting the policy.
We're amending whatever we do.
So I think,
Give it a range.
Whatever
Okay.
table.
Whatever,
so
yeah.
I think if
This
we're in
is
the
just a
15
discussion on the MTP.
Yeah,
We're
Correct.
not doing anything with the policy.
The policy is going to be its own kettle of fish.
Yep, absolutely.
okay, so at what point, so that 15 to 30, what we do with that, Brian, is we choose somewhere in that range, change this table to. Right now it's at 15. Where in that range do we want this table?
22 and a half, right?
So, and then at the point that we get to the policies, then we can like remember this discussion, be like, we were thinking 15 to 30. And then we can at that point nail down if someone's feeling a little bit different. And for now, so your suggestion,
22 and a half.
22 and a half. Sorry. Okay, so, and this is an amendment to the motion, is that how we proceed, Robert?
Yes, please.
Okay, so, amended by Mr. Linwood, seconded by Mr. Boland.
I just say that 22 and a half makes it sound like we're being very specific. I think 20 is round.
It's gonna be complicated, say 20, how about 25? What's wrong with 25?
Fine, but
25 makes it.
but we don't need to put that.
Okay, other,
This is why I don't do math.
so we got a 20 to 25, and we got a 22.5. The motion right now is 22.5.
You want to amend the amendment
Any
to some other end of it?
kind of a friendly amendment?
I would say you pick either or.
Oh, yeah. Let me go to Google and get a random number.
Okay, I mean. So I guess in the staff mind, those are all close enough in the range that,
I mean, again,
It's a spreadsheet.
It's a
Yeah,
planning document.
exactly.
yeah.
Excel does that,
It's not rocket surgery.
Yeah.
except when they decide to add random numbers.
So at this point, I don't think having the 22.5 is gonna be a problem for us. So,
But I think establishing a range.
because I mean, basically what they're gonna do is
Just over the long haul, that makes the most sense.
they're gonna take that number, right, and you're gonna, with all the projects that have been given, you're gonna try to hit that, basically. And it will be give and take some, but this is kind of just the general starting point.
And I would, just as a comment, say, let's see what the policy committee does with this, if they react to it, and if assuming they don't have any major issue with it, maybe back in January. Start with it.
And then the pavement that you mentioned, so going forward, is it gonna be the kind of the 19 without pavement, or how is it gonna be looked at when you?
So in the policies and procedures, pavement itself is its own separate thing, so that it's a complicated mess that we'll have to look at and see. For us now, I think for the MTP, this helps us with 22.5. We're gonna put it in the Excel. It gives us how much of the AMAT's allocation is going towards non-motorized, pair that with all the other costs or the revenues, so we know how much per year we have available for projects, so we can put those projects in and pair down the listing. Bring a list to you guys that's fiscally constrained.
Okay, and so the pavement is not gonna be that, because it's counted differently.
It's a separate thing, yes.
Help to clarify the motion or what we're forwarding on the policy to say that the 22.5 assumes a range of 15 to 30.
I don't think we need that at this point, because it's a separate thing. I have it written down to look at the policies and procedures, 15 to 30% for the tip, and can start working on that, because we're gonna have to balance all the other percentages. I think for now, just keeping it 22.5, that's our direction, and we'll mention to the policy committee, you all have the discussion that our policies and procedures should be relooked at to be a 15 to 30% range. And you chose 22.5 for the MTP.
They know how we got there.
Yes.
Okay. So do we vote on that amendment first?
Yes.
Okay, are there any objections to approving the amendment? That the table is changed to 22.5% non-motorized. Okay, hearing no objections, that amendment to the motion is approved. Now returning back, are there other amendments that we would like to make? Should we advance to the original motion?
Which was the low table, right?
The low table, I think at that point, we just need to discuss. Do we go with the 22.5 option between the low and the high here? Or are we better off going with the more conservative?
I think both of them said 15, so I think what we're doing is we're just saying
Well,
that it was 20.5, but then the question is, do we do the high or the low with all these other pieces?
the motion on the floor, if I'm correct, is the low, and so I think we need to have a discussion over if the low represents the most conservative
Yeah.
outlook. And, you know, we talked a little bit about hope and sunshine and stuff like that earlier. Is that really the appropriate thing to recommend to policy board?
So what are the implications if we do the low versus the high?
I think you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, the difference between those two. One is 5.4 billion, one is 4.3 billion. It's honestly not that far. I mean, Aaron provided some background that in previous rounds, that difference has been much more significant. So we didn't find that there was a whole lot that we could play with. But you're more than welcome to make any other changes or, you know, say we want the high grants, but we want the no state, you know, we want the high federal grants. We don't want any state grants. I mean, you could tweak it like that or in more granular detail if you'd like. But either way, it's not gonna be a huge discrepancy between the two.
And so kind of like we were talking about before, what you're gonna do with this is you're gonna take it and come up with a fiscally constrained project list. And so if we vote for the high, there's gonna be more projects in there. And if we vote for the low, then it's gonna be less, and we'll be trying to see how to make those work. So I guess, you know, where do we want to fall in this process? It won't restrict us at that point in the future. Can we kind of go and change the financial estimate? Or are we kind
It is
of tied up?
updated every several years, so you can change it next time.
So we're tied in for the rest of the MTP with what we decide right now? Or is there a chance that we'll come and we'll say,
I
things
mean,
might.
we're gonna bring the MTP to you many more times. I think we'd like to have, you know, a good grasp on what you prefer for the financial analysis now, but in theory, you could come back to this at a later date.
Yeah, what we're really trying to avoid is gaming the system by being like, oh, not enough projects get in, so let's bump up these numbers some, because you're supposed to be basing this fiscal assumption on historical data, what you reasonably think is available. Not, oh, I didn't see the 5 projects I want, so let's add another 100 million in here and see if we can get them added in. So we really try and refrain from making adjustments to the fiscal assumptions after we have it approved at this point. So then we're kind of locked in. But like we said, we update this every 4 years. And this information changes on that basis. So it's not we're stuck with this until the end of time.
Nor are you gonna leave money on the table if it turns out to be a particularly generous year.
Correct. This is our best guess as of right now, and things go up and down over the years.
Do we have any track record? Well, we're getting in the system. We have a track record, how well we guessed in the last couple times we've done
Done
this.
pretty well most of the years, because I think we take a hard line with it and don't really put in a whole lot of outlandish assumptions, like, oh, we're gonna get 2 billion more on top of this, on top of that. No, we take a pretty conservative approach in the past in some regards.
Well, and to that end, I think if we go with the most conservative outlook, it's gonna really do a lot to make sure that we have our priorities set so that if, you know, Santa Claus shows up with an extra pile of cash somewhere along the way, then we've at least got our bases covered or have a plan to get our bases covered.
Is this going to the policy committee?
Yes.
Does it go to the policy committee as the TAC approved the low scenario?
Recommended.
Recommend, is that what you, is that how you word it? You know, from the tell, or is this the planning factor table that the TAC recommends?
We would put in there the scenario version that you guys recommend with any edits. So we would take whatever you guys approve, and right now you're looking at the low scenario with the 22.5 non-motorized added in there, and then any other changes added and say, this is the scenario that they're recommending with these
But it
changes.
doesn't go to them with the words low scenario.
Well, I mean,
Not if it's the only scenario. that-
yeah, if it's the only scenario
The only one
you,
you're saying, I don't know if I beg that question, quite frankly.
we would just say, this is the technical advisory committee recommended financial assumption for the 2050 MTP. We'll tell them how we got there. They looked at the low scenario, which was made up of this, and then they made these changes, something like that. But if you guys make a decision today, then we can erase the low or high scenarios.
So here's one of the thoughts that I have looking at MTPs in the past. There's an illustrative list that isn't within the financially constrained, but list some different projects usually that you could then consider if you came upon additional funds, right?
Those illustrative projects also used to usually have B's behind the number instead of M's behind the number, which is why they're illustrative, because
So they're so big
we could take all the tips for 7 years.
and not be able to.
That's one of the things I've been wanting to work on, is kind of maybe whittling down how many projects are in the illustrative list, because I think it gives people this kind of false sense of hope that these are gonna be here in the next few years. And I'm like, no, this is after all the 2050 stuff is done, and then if go beyond, because if more money comes available, we're gonna be looking at projects that are already in the priority list to move up. And that was one.
Sooner, basically.
And I think the illustrative has just been so confusing to people. It's gonna be a part of the discussion we're going to have as we develop the MTP of what we want to do with that.
Okay. So we can't view the illustrative as a way to like have some project.
I look at illustrative as sort of a parking lot for ideas. You know, if Amazon decided to move their world headquarters here tomorrow, and we suddenly had tax revenue through the ceiling, I didn't know what to do with, we'll start taking some of those on. And they exist if some magic grant happens or something like that, and they need to be in the TIF, but as a planning factor, at least for the next short to medium term, they're just in a parking lot somewhere looking for a date.
Yeah. So one of the things that a high scenario would do is it would give us more projects actually in the fiscally constrained, which would then be ones we could choose from based on the money that we have. But then we might not prioritize things quite as cleanly. So it's probably.
You're prioritizing out of crisis where you're out of money, you only have 3 projects to choose from because they're the only, all the others have already met certain hurdles that you can't turn them back. You're doing it on the front end.
So is that a fair way to present kind of the difference between high and low? Is high gives us a little bit more kind of in the pot. Low just kind of focuses us a little bit more on what our priorities are.
And I just want to remind, we have about an hour left of this meeting, and we have a number of other action items. Just kind of keep that in mind.
I have a question,
Go ahead.
not related to high, low, and illustrative. The MOA road capital bonds, first line there. So our CIP list is not in any way fiscally constrained. We build it we used to build this 75 million a year. We're bonding for 28 to 30. So we've scaled that back to build it for 50 a year for the out years, 45 to 50. Use that as a tool to talk with the state legislature, with the assembly and others when we try to demonstrate need. But does that play into this at all? And the other part of that capital bond program is that in any given year, there may be no funds, no capital construction funds in our approved bond or LRTD funds. They could all go to a specific drainage project or a snow dump. Does that play into this?
Yeah, so that's the top line.
I guess what I'm saying is the number in the real world in 2023 or 2024, the real number could be zero. It may not be $9.5 million.
I think that's why it's the average along that line is so low, is because we are averaging the
Okay.
recent years,
But if we have
in which case there might be a.
4 years of zero,
It would average out and show. And this is not every project in the CIP because there's some projects that wouldn't really be an MTP project. These are like,
This is cop cars.
yeah, stuff like that. So this is like the road projects, like upgrading your collector or something like that, the bigger project that we put in, you're not like drainage projects or other small things like that. So we work with Gary Jones to kind of get this list, and we provide this information, and then we average it out per year and then apply inflation to that.
good.
So a geo bond, government obligate, is that a state? That's in the state. So that looks like that's primarily, other than the FHWA. Those are the three main areas, FHWA, go bond, and state legislative grants.
And the federal grants.
So are we comfortable not showing any state legislative grants or go bonds as part of the assumption?
It's been since 2012.
I agree. Yeah, they're few and far between, and talked about a lot during the session, and never acted. Yeah, a long time. I think that's a conservative way to go.
And you really have no control over what's in them.
Will the fact that the MTP say doesn't show any, will that sway or affect or influence the legislature at all?
And just realize this is legislative grants or geo bonds for our area. So there may be other locations that get it, but we wouldn't count that as part of our revenue.
Yeah.
That doesn't prevent the municipality from asking.
Right.
Yeah,
I guess that's
you
fair.
you can ask, and you can pick something off the illustrative table and ask for that. Again, every night, somebody wins the lottery every week.
Yeah, that's true. They're not gonna say, oh, what's your FTP say? They're just gonna.
Well, but at that point, yeah, it helps to have it in your plan somewhere, but it lives the illustrative.
Okay,
How do you call the question?
Thank you.
Second,
let's see, so. Are there, so far then, the question before us is recommending recommending the board to the policy committee, the low scenario. As the 22.5 amendment to the non-motorized fund. Are there any objections to that motion? Okay, hearing none, the motion is approved. Okay, thanks everyone. Good conversation, good insight. Let's move on then to item 5B. Bicycle, pedestrian advisory committee nomination.
The Joni Will.
Okay, so, today we are requesting approval for, a recommendation to approve a new BPAC member. And, so Chelsea Ward Lawler, who is now a MAT staff, left the BPAC committee, a while back. So we are asking to replace her with Diana Rhodes, who I think is on the phone today to answer any questions if you have questions. I'll just read a brief A bio about Diana. Diana Rhodes is the Community Engagement Director at Anchorage Parks Foundation. She has more than 20 years of public policy experience in Anchorage, Tucson, and Washington, D.C., including 10 sessions in the Alaska Legislature. She is a lifelong advocate for parks, public lands, and active transportation. She brings a unique and valuable perspective to the AMATS Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee. We also have had the pleasure of working with Diana for many years on our now motorized projects, and she's great and really have enjoyed working with her so far. And just to give a little bit of background on the process, we did have several applications come in for new BPAC members. So we took the time to review all of those applications and sat down as staff and looked at those and then made a decision based on qualifications. So then Diana rose to the top. So there she is. If you have any questions for her, she's on the line.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jenny, and thanks for being here, Diana. Any questions or comments from the committee?
It's an excellent choice. Happy to support Ms. Rhodes.
I guess I don't know her, but reviewing her resume is very impressive. I would support.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Any other questions or comments from the committee? How about questions or comments from the public? Hey,
Mr. Chair, I don't know if Diana wanted to say anything or we're just here
Oh,
for
yeah, sure.
questions, but give her the opportunity to speak if she wants to.
gonna take a minute or so, Diana?
Well, thank you. Looking forward to it. That's all I want to say. Looking forward to working with you and very excited about moving forward on transportation projects and in particular, non-motorized connections. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Okay, so what's the will of the committee?
I move to recommend approval of this appointment to the policy committee.
Okay, moved by Mr. Lyon, second by Mr. Okay, I heard it confused. We'll let Mr. Leamy second as well. Are there any objections to the motion? Okay, hearing none, the motion is approved. And I've worked closely with Diana and I'm excited too. She'll be fantastic. So thank you, Diana, for all you do for our community. Moving on to
Thank you.
item. What?
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item 5C, pavement and bridge targets, DOT and PF. We'll be taking that one on.
Happy meeting.
There you go.
You'll actually get to hear from me today. So I know I'm doing something crazy. Okay, so these are pavement and bridge targets for 2022 and 2026. So these have been before us before in the past for, I believe, 18 through 22. Or previous years of it, 5 and 4 year or 2 and 4 year targets for pavement and bridge on the interstate and non-interstate NHS facilities. So these are predominantly DOT and PF facilities. Pavement and bridge targets are required every few years, and these are the updated versions that the state has approved. And now it is up to the MPO to decide if they want to establish their own targets or if they want to agree to support the state's DOT targets. The last time these came through, AMATS agreed to support DOT's targets because it's all on DOT's facilities. And this go-round staff is also recommending that we support DOT targets. I have attached a link on the memo that you can look up what how the previous targets did. I was just looking on it and there's a few that are missing. So if you have questions on what the actuals were, I'll have to go back and kind of talk with DOT about why they're missing on the FHWA's website, but it looks like DOT's been doing a very good job at keeping their pavement in above poor condition. So middle or above. So, and we're hoping to continue to support them as time goes on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? And any questions or comments from the public? Okay, what's the will of the committee? Okay, moved by Mr. Lindemood. So by approve, we're recommending the policy committee approval. Is that
Would you recommend or move to move it?
We'll forward it based on the action here that we'll recommend supporting states targets.
okay? Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay, moved by Mr. Lindemood, seconded by Mr. Leamy. Are there any objections to approving the motion? Okay, hearing none, the motion is approved. Next, we have item 6A, Public Transportation Department Agency Safety Plan.
This will actually be Jamie Acton who will talk about this one.
Hi, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry that I'm not there in person today. I'm actually on PTO in Las Vegas right now, so trying to do this from a hotel room. So the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan is due by December 31st. This update basically serves as notice for AMATs, the MPO, and also our state partners that we are in progress with this plan and the federal requirement. Basically, all recipients of 5307 funds and 5310 funds that do not directly operate rail are required to have this plan. And essentially what the plan does is it outlines our safety plans that we have in place throughout the department and the municipality of Anchorage. And there will be some performance targets that are established that the MPO will be able to report on and utilize going forward. So there were a few new criteria put forth for this update. So that's why we are kind of up against the deadline. We had to establish a frontline safety committee that it was made up by representative employees and management team. And then there was also another requirement that basically said that we needed to include a management policy and processes and safety assurances and protocols. So we're working on getting all of those things together. And so this document has to go to before the assembly. We're working on trying to get that. I believe it's December 20th is the last assembly meeting. So we're working to get that. And so we hope to have this plan to AMATs in the state by the deadline of December 31st. So that's pretty much my update.
Okay, thank you, Jamie, and thanks for making the sacrifice to join us.
No problem.
Do we have any questions or comments from me? Any questions or comments from the public? Okay, well, thank you, Jamie. We appreciate it. This is not an action item, so we'll just move to the next. Project and plan update, item 6B, federal fiscal year 22 fourth quarter obligation report. Is that yours, Aaron?
That'll be me. Okay, so as part of our requirement for the TIP, we have to have an obligation report posted on our website and brought before you, basically saying how did we do in getting all of our funds obligated for the year. So this is for the 2019 to 22 TIP, the fourth quarter. So this is our last portion of that project or that TIP before it moved into the new one. At the end of the fourth quarter, we are supposed to be at 0%. For this go around, we are at 707,000 under. So that means we didn't obligate 707,000 of the dollars. Now, a big chunk of that was $400,000 for the 92nd Avenue study that was put into the extension reconnaissance study that was put into the TIP. When we were working on that project, no one at the municipality of Anchorage was able to come up with a match for that study. So we did not get that funding obligated. So that study did not move forward. So that's why there's a big chunk there. Another big chunk is the Fish Creek Trail Connection project. We only needed, about 810,000 of the $1,010,000 that was programmed in there. But we're more than making up for that with our Amendment 1, where we're adding a bunch more funding in for Fish Creek Trail. And then there was a small amount of the Anchorage Airwide Pathway and Trails pavement replacement where we were under what we had programmed in there. So pretty good overall. And, one of the things to kind of keep in mind is that in general, DOT and PF has been very, very good to us, that if we don't fully obligate our program in the year, they often make that funding available to us as the obligations later on. So we'll work with them and see how that happens. And yeah, that's all I have. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from the committee? How does this compare with prior years? Is this about 2% kind of?
Some years are, I think in most part, we're very good at keeping ourselves fully obligated. I think this year was just a quick little, it would have been a lot better if the 90-second advocate had gone through, but yeah, we're almost always at the 0% or 1 or 2%.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments? Any questions or comments from the public? Okay, hearing none. Move on. So thank you, Aaron, for that.
Thank you.
Item 7, no general comments I see on the agenda. Do you have anything for us?
Just as a reminder that our technical advisory committee meeting in January is moved up 1 hour from 1:30 to 3:30, and that is to accommodate the transportation fair. Thanks. The transportation fair that is happening. So just be aware of that. I believe Christine has already sent out the invites for that meeting. So see you there.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Are there any committee comments? Yeah.
We
Nice.
should have this meeting at the transportation fair if we really want something.
You don't answer that.
That's right. It could be like a talk show, you know. Yeah, I haven't thought about that one. That'd be interesting. Okay, other comments from the committee? How about public comments? The member of the public. Making comments. Okay, I think we're good. Thanks everyone for coming. We are adjourned at 3:49.
Thank you.